Mahindra, Vice Chairman and Managing Director of M&M. Mr. Mahindra, thanks very much for talking to us the day before the WEF meeting kicks off. This theme resonates with you as well in some sense, because in last year's meeting, the meeting that you do at the beginning of every year to set the sort of tone for M&M also was a 3R dominated meeting. What does it mean to be able to rethink, redesign, rebuild in your context at M&M for the next decade? I'm not talking about this year or the next 2 years, but this decade is going to be characterized by a very different global economy as opposed to the last decade. What kind of work does that set out for you?
Well, I'm very glad that my 3Rs came 1 year before, and we have visual evidence in the form of your interview right here last year. Very similar. If you remember, what I had said was reboot, reinvent and reignite. And in a sense, it could be really paraphrasing the same thing. So we're prepared for this new decade that will emerge, and for which the WEF here is preparing. Rethink really means that a whole number of old models of economic policies, of financial regulation, of the way in which businessmen monitor themselves, all that has got to be rechanged or rethought. In other words, they are saying, think about your fundamental underlying propositions to everything you do. And then once you do that, once you create a tabula rasa, so to speak, in your mind, then you have to redesign. You have to redesign in order to build for that new world, or to put onto that new clean slate. And I hope that this conference does get down to that level, and that we don't spend time only arguing about how to rethink things and get into ideological battles. If we get beyond that and start talking about the actual redesigning of mechanisms, the redesigning of regulations, that would be very useful. Rebuild, I think, is a question of execution. I don't believe that's the job of Davos or the WEF. What WEF wants is dialogue, conversation, rethinking and redesigning, and then going out and executing. So I believe rebuild is more an instruction and a clarion call rather than something you're going to see accomplished here. You asked about what does it mean for Mahindra?
Yeah.
Well, as I said, we have a 1 year head start on this game plan, so to speak. It means that we have to re-look at every value proposition we have. What are people going to want? Do we focus on people's needs as opposed to their wants, which what we were thinking of doing earlier? Do we have to go back to frugal engineering and frugal innovation? Is that going to be the mantra? How do we deploy it in a more judicious manner? And finally, implementation, I think, is the common thread always. There's nothing different about rebuilding. One is always building. You're always destroying the old, building the new. So I think the third R is not really something we will agonize about. It's the first two that Mahindra will be focusing on.
You've often spoken of how at M&M you're working towards a federation premium as opposed to a conglomerate discount. My question to you is, right now your business is obviously dominated by auto. Over the next 10 years, do you see businesses like IT become an equal part in terms of their contribution to revenue? What's the shape and the sort of the contribution of the group likely to be 5, 7, 8 years down the line? How are you planning that?
As you know, I'm asked this question very often. Questions about what size group do you want to have 10 years from now? What is the share of revenue going to be?
Okay, yeah.
I really believe that half the fun in my job is not trying to pin things down to that level of metrics. What you want is a template. You want to have a federation, a diversified federation that embodies a certain common set of values, that embodies entrepreneurship, that grows on India's growth, and so on. And then let the best person win, man or woman. Let the best man or woman win. So, in fact, this year it's very interesting, or this quarter. We had our board meeting just yesterday in Mumbai. And last year, the IT sector had way surpassed the automotive and farm business in terms of both revenue and profit. This quarter, it's the automotive and farm equipment sector that is back to being more than 60% of the pie. And there were literally whoops in the air by those sectors. So I love that race. I love that competitiveness. Why should we presume that IT will be larger? Why should I presume that? I would love people to go in there and prove everyone wrong. The question is, have you unleashed entrepreneurialism and growth? And then let the chips fall where they may.
Okay, you've also spoken about previously of one of your new interests, and that is solar energy. How are you going to go about doing any of that? Why I'm asking you this question is not to pin you down on which specific new businesses are you looking at over the course of the next 10 years, but to better understand whether at the end of this decade is M&M going to be a very different collection of businesses as opposed to how we see it today, or will auto always dominate everything you do?
Well, it could be any of the above. It could be auto continuing to dominate. It could be a whole new slew of businesses that are coming out and have stolen the limelight. It might be a judicious mix. Well, you mentioned solar energy, renewables, for example. This is being done under the aegis of the new internal private equity department called Mahindra Partners. And they have been doing work, in fact, for a good 18 months now in research into how we come out with a plan for solar energy. I'm not sure you read this, but I think about that time, about a year ago, I wrote an editorial in the Times of India about my belief in what they call concentrated solar power and how that could be a mother lode for India. We could be a Saudi Arabia of solar energy, for example. That was a very tentative look at it. And since then, they've been working on this template. We have some plans which are underway, nothing that I could reveal or excite you with right now.
Thank you.
But certainly we have great intent.
But when you say great intent, can you tell us how is this? I mean, how is it going to work? Are you at M&M going to start up another company or business that is actually going to go about the business of putting up solar power plants? Or are you just going to seed fund ventures that you think are exciting in the renewable space? Is this going to become a revenue line for M&M or an interest space?
I hope there's nothing I'm doing that won't become a revenue line for M&M. Otherwise, I should probably have my salary reduced. So I certainly think that if we spend that kind of time, there should be a revenue line and very, very positively a profit line as well. Which one could it be? That's exactly what we are looking into right now. Should we be integrators? Should we be developers? Should we put up the plants? Which technologies should we bet on? Should we bet on a slew of technologies? The one thing we are finding out is that there is no hard and fast roadmap today. There is no, even within CSP, there is no specified technology. PV, which looked like it would be falling behind, suddenly is catching up again with thin film technology. So it's a very interesting field, and what we are looking at is how do we play in this field? How do we become initiators of projects and exploit the natural advantage that India has? As I said, there is no algorithm we've come up with yet, and we'll share it the moment we have one.
So solar energy is one. What else interests you that could potentially become a whole new business for M&M in the course of this next 10 years?
Well, you know, the reason we've set up Mahindra Partners is so that we can explore all these new avenues. The thing that I found is that with relative success comes deal flow. When you demonstrate that you can create a viable model of spawning new businesses, that when you can maintain your value system and your reliability while doing that, then you get a number of technologists, companies, overseas companies coming to you to look at how you can do business. So every day there's new deal flow. Which one of these will become something that M&M will bet on and will become a big business, I really don't know. And that's the fun of going to work every day.
Give me at least the spaces that you're interested in.
You know,
because when you say anything...
everything comes in. What we look at is whether it is going to be something we can scale up, that could be material, that has a place either in India or globally for us to create some traction through comparative advantage, use the ecosystem of M&M. We have a whole slew of things, a template that you overlay, and then you say, well, this one looks more promising and this is what we'll pursue. That's how Mahindra Partners is working. So it's a very exciting area right now, and I wish I could...
So you won't tell me which one of those businesses looks most promising?
I wish I could give you a scoop in the snow right here, but I don't have one.
It's not going to happen.
I apologize, no.
All right. We've just come out of an interesting earnings season, or at least are still coming out of an interesting earnings season. So I'd like to put a few India-specific questions to you before I get back to the 10-year theme. You've had some flack from analysts on what you did at Tech Mahindra, reporting different revenue lines differently as opposed to what you did the year before. But like you said, autos come back. And even then in auto, I think there was some disappointment because the expectations were much higher, but raw material costs seem to have caught up a bit. So you want to characterize what you think this year is likely to be for the Indian economy and for your different businesses?
Well, you started with very specific ones about the analysts. I think, yes, it is ironical that you show a tenfold growth in profits and you disappoint the market. But I think there certainly we have to do some soul searching as to how does one interact with analysts and better manage expectations within a governance framework.
Are you referring to the auto numbers?
I'm talking the auto numbers.
Auto numbers.
Because the analysts were simply ahead of the curve in terms of what they were expecting. As you know, we are very, very jealous and we guard our reputation for integrity and governance very strongly. And so the question is, how does one let analysts understand the changing nature of the business model or in that particular quarter? There were, for example, which we did talk to analysts about, there was an ex gratia payment that was done for 2 years as opposed to 1 because of a negotiation that was done with the union. There was octroi refund last year which perhaps was not taken into account. So you could easily narrow this down, and then you come down to the fact that raw material costs were a little higher in the quarter. So given that we are a company that doesn't issue forward-looking statements and has to be uniform about that, it becomes difficult to manage expectations in the appropriate way. I think when analysts drill down our results, they will see that we're still on a good wicket. As far as Tech Mahindra is concerned, I don't want to leave it as just reporting revenue line differently as if we changed accounting rules. I think they were they tried to elaborate very quickly on that what they did was with BT and with other clients, and specifically, there was a changing requirement in terms of the contracts. So as Bharat explained to the analysts, when you change your revenue, when you change your model and you're going to change prices, that's why the revenue line changed. I can understand a little bit of concern, but once again in Tech Mahindra, I think when they drill down, I think they will see that we put up a fairly robust performance in trying times.